The past several days have finally breathed some life back into the crypto ecosystem, which we do really need, but the next several days are going to be massively important. And I will say that if we are going to see Aerodrome and even just altcoins generally, if we're going to see their momentum continue, we really need to see this happen. So we're going to go right on in. We're going to check out all of the things that are happening in the crypto market today. And we're also going to be going over some news as it relates specifically to Aerodrome, because there's both some pretty positive news and some pretty positive updates that continue to come out from the Aerodrome team. And then there's a little bit of uncertainty or maybe some speculation within the community that we have gotten a little bit of clarification to that I did want to cover today as well. So let's jump right on in because we've got a bunch to cover. So first off, let's take a look at the market overview of just kind of crypto in general and the altcoins. We can see we are just barely in the bottom side of neutral. We did have, of course, a bunch of fear spread through the market after that liquidation event, and the market's finally starting to recover, so it seems. We are still definitely in fear though, kind of on the lower half of fear, but we also can see on the open interest in volume, we have started to see kind of this come back and climb down a little bit, particularly on price and open interest. But on volume, we have seen massively elevated volume. So there is definitely a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of money being traded around because people don't exactly know which direction we're headed. If we do look at the liquidation maps, we can see actually the initial on the 1 day is heading towards shorts, and on the 7 day, or towards longs, and then on the 7 day, we're about balanced. So we have seen a major move to the upside here, with current price being about 111,000 for Bitcoin. So obviously in the very short term, we could see a push, at least in my opinion, up to maybe around the 114,000 range, because there is still a ton of liquidity here to the upside, and it's very close. But after that, it would not surprise me if we potentially saw a little bit of a retrace coming from Bitcoin, which of course will cool down the altcoins. That's why that's important to understand. Now, looking at Aerodrome, we're seeing something very important here, and I think a lot of what happens over the next couple of days will really tell the story here. So obviously we had this consolidationary period. We were breaking out of it due to that liquidation event. We have actually sold off even slightly further since then, but we are starting to mount a recovery. Now, as you might be able to see right now, we are really like on top of this level of resistance. It turned into a support. Now it's a resistance again. Who knows, maybe it'll be a support tomorrow. It's hard to say. And that's what's really important, is we do really need to see a break above this and ideally settle on this level of support. And even more than that, it would be great if we could get up above this trend line here. Now, the reason this trend line is important is because if we go to the daily candles, we can see something pretty interesting. This trend line is something that we had been actually following basically since the beginning of April. And we'd really come and bounced off of this trend line several different times. Now, of course, the liquidation event dropped us right through that. And then we did actually mount a comeback and got rejected off of this line. So ideally what we would need to see is another run back up above it. And let's hope that we can kind of settle on it, not turn it into a level of resistance like it has shown potentially recently. So ideally, we do see a comeback mount here, and we see this kind of start to gain a little bit of positive momentum. That is also why it's important, if we go back to the market overview and the leverage, to see a push continue for Bitcoin. Because if we see a push continue for Bitcoin, I get a little bit more optimism going into the space. Maybe we pull out of fear. Maybe we actually start to see altcoins get some momentum a little bit, and then we could see things like Aerodrome run back up and set on a little bit more comfortable ground, I guess we could say, compared to what it has been currently. So that is kind of one of the main things that we are looking at. I did want to jump right on into the news though today. If you are interested though, of course, you can be trading Aerodrome. I do have a lot of those links in the description below. I have BTCC, which is definitely the best option here if you are interested. And then I do also have a couple of links to Weex and BloFin as well. BloFin is actually doing a limited time ICP reward, which is really cool. So if you are an ICP holder or interested in ICP, you can go ahead to BloFin and check that out. And then also I have been trading on Weex here. You can see actually a decent bit of profit showing here. We do still have some of our Bitcoin trades that are negative due to the DCA or the DCA strategy that we have been using. But you can see here pretty green overall, things looking really good on our trades as the market is pumping. So if you are interested, of course, you can feel free to check those links in the description below. Now let's go get right on into the news on X. First off, we can see This is kind of one of the main use cases, and this, in my opinion, is one of the things that is such a strong and such a bullish indicator for Aerodrome, is the fact that Base has now done this permissionless launch, which essentially gets you a direct listing onto Coinbase itself, which is insane news. But what you can see is there's a lot of crypto tokens that will withhold and reserve a pretty large portion of their token supply to get listed on a centralized exchange. Here you can see they're claiming that some centralized exchanges will charge 9% of their token supply to list them. Well, with Aerodrome and now Base, you can get a permissionless launch plan and actually show up on Coinbase due to their new Base integration, which is really, really impressive and super cool. Now, this could completely change how tokens and the tokenomics and all this type of stuff breaks down, because you may not need to withhold such a massive amount of your liquidity or such a massive amount of your token supply to be listing on a centralized exchange. You could just kind of get direct listed with some of the new tech that is coming through, which I think is really cool. Now, of course, we'll have to see if this kind of moves into other centralized exchanges. Currently, it's really only Coinbase using the Base ecosystem that this is allowed on. But even still, Coinbase is a tier 1 exchange, and you're basically having direct access to a tier 1 exchange, which is pretty impressive. So that is, of course, really, really good news to see. And I think that that could really change kind of some of the decisions that certain projects make in terms of where they build. I mean, I think, if you can essentially get access for almost free onto a tier 1 centralized exchange if you build on Base, that's a huge deal, right? And obviously Aerodrome is kind of they're the project that runs the game on Base, at least up until this point. And so this is, of course, massively bullish for both Base as well as Aerodrome. Now, a little bit of some uncertainty or potentially fear spreading through the community that I wanted to address a little bit as well, is we can actually see this really super insightful and detailed thread here from HashSpike. I'm not going to go through the whole thing just because I don't want to spend too much time here. But there was a recent announcement that essentially Aerodrome was going to be working with Velodrome, and there's these essentially there's this Metadex that's coming in, and people were essentially concerned what that could mean for Aerodrome fees and stakers, kind of what that looks like overall. And so you can see here there's a little bit of some context added by HashSpike, but with that kind of context added, we'll go straight into the response from Alexander, who again is the CEO or who leads the Aerodrome project. So he said here, this is a Discord post from the Aerodrome community on Discord. You can see, like I said, there are many possibilities, but I don't even think that the potential path would be too complicated given the maximal utility of the tokens. Velo can be analogized as a claim on all DEX fees across the superchain. AERO, all DEX revenues on Base. If you normalize against that, they could be brought together today, and everyone would in essence have the same claim to the combined pie, Base plus superchain. And if you grow that pie through even more expansion, everyone's claim grows. But that's just one of many ways Metadex has put Uni out to pasture IMO. So essentially what is going on here, to kind of break this down a little bit further, is there's this new concept called Metadexes, and it seems like there are various projects working together to essentially combine their liquidity abilities and the liquidity assets that they have on multiple different chains to create this multi-chain so-called Metadex. And with that is what allows people to essentially kind of maybe trade multi-chain, trade, add increased liquidity, things like that. Well, there's been some concerns, as you could see in the post, that people were getting a little bit concerned that, Aerodrome's fees might actually get knocked down a little bit. And of course, as mentioned here, you can see that that's not the case. I think there's kind of two sides to this argument and I want to cover both. The first side of the argument, I think, is, well, yes, that is true, because the claim is not being impacted to the base fees, so everybody remains whole. However, there is kind of the growth side, and there's the growth expansion of it, where if people were expecting that Aerodrome were to go multi-chain and maybe take more of a Uniswap type of path, well, maybe that path gets cut down because other dexes are going to be brought into this Metadex strategy, and some of the growth side is limited for Aerodrome. I think that's maybe more of the bearish take on the news that we have seen here. Now, the bullish take, I think, is probably something slightly different, which is, well, if you have all of these different dexes coming together to create this form of Metadex, that provides almost an economies of scale. And the more dexes that are involved in this Metadex concept, the bigger it gets, the easier it gets to use, and the more adoption that it will have, meaning that everybody's smaller slice of the pie grows larger relative to if they were all trying to do it themselves. And so that to me, I think is the bullish take. And that's one of the ones that, yeah, I'm hopeful that that's the direction that it goes, but we just never know for sure. So overall, those are the main news updates that we have for Aerodrome. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below, especially as it relates to this kind of recent community update as it relates to this whole Metadex thing. Do you think that this could be a bullish thing for Aerodrome, bearish? I'd love to know your take if you agree with either one of my kind of outcomes, or maybe you think that there's a third one that I wasn't considering. I would love to hear all of those. So drop those in the comment section below. Also, I would love to hear anything you have in terms of where we think we're going with Aerodrome in terms of price, and are we going to be waiting a long time? Are we seeing a bounce? All that type of stuff I would love to hear. And then if you did find the information in the video useful, you know what to do. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.